Welcome back to the warmth of our gathering, friends of the night. As the sparks fly upward into the dark canopy of the trees, we turn our minds back to the cradle of civilization. Tonight, we leave the battlefields and the temples behind to enter the private, flickering halls of the Greek elite. But before we pour the wine and begin our journey into the ancient night, please take a moment to subscribe to Campfire Night Stories. A simple like on this video helps us keep these historical fires burning bright for everyone who seeks the truth of the past. We often imagine ancient Greece as a place of cold marble and silent statues, but the reality was far louder, wetter, and more chaotic. Tonight, we uncover the secrets of the symposium and the wild rites of the forest. Tonight, we ask, what ancient Greek parties were actually like? Part 1. The Threshold of the Symposium. To understand a Greek party, you must first forget everything you know about a modern night out. For the wealthy citizens of Athens or Corinth, a party was not a random gathering, but a structured ritual known as the symposium. The word literally translates to drinking together, but it was far more than just a session at a local tavern. It began at sunset, as guests arrived at the Andron, which was the specially designed men's quarters of a private home. This room was the heart of Greek social life, a space where the floor was often decorated with intricate mosaics and the walls painted with scenes of gods and heroes. As a guest, the first thing you would do upon entering was to remove your sandals and allow a slave to wash your feet. This was not merely for hygiene, it was a transition from the dusty, chaotic world of the street into the sacred space of the home. You would then be led to a klein, a long, cushioned couch where you would recline on your left elbow. The Greeks did not sit at tables to eat or drink. They lounged like gods, their bodies relaxed, and their minds prepared for the night ahead. There were usually between 7 and 15 men in the room, arranged in a circle so that everyone could see and hear each other. This physical arrangement was crucial, for the symposium was intended to be a meeting of equals, even if only within the upper class. The evening was divided into 2 distinct phases. First, the deipnon, or the meal, and then the true symposium, the drinking. The food was simple yet refined: roasted meats, fresh fish, olives, honey, soaked cakes, and seasonal fruits like figs and grapes. They ate with their fingers, using pieces of flatbread to scoop up the juices, and the atmosphere was initially quiet and respectful. But, as the remains of the meal were cleared away and the floor was swept of bones and pits, a change occurred in the air. The symposiarch, or the master of the feast, was elected by a throw of the dice to decide the rules of the night. He was the one who determined the ratio of water to wine and the speed at which the cups would be drained. In the Greek mind, drinking unmixed wine was a sign of barbarism and madness. A civilized man always tempered his fire with water. With the first pour of the crater, the massive mixing bowl, the party truly began. Part 2. The mixing of the wine and the mind. The crater stood in the center of the room like a silent deity, holding the lifeblood of the evening. The wine was usually mixed at a ratio of 3 parts water to 1 part wine, creating a drink that allowed for a long night of conversation without immediate intoxication. Before the first cup was shared, a libation was poured onto the floor for the agathos daimon, the good spirit. This was followed by 3 more pours, one for the Olympian gods, one for the fallen heroes, and a final one for Zeus the savior. The Greeks believed that Dionysus, the god of wine, was physically present within the bowl, and his power had to be respected. As the cups began to circulate from left to right, the conversation shifted from politics and trade to the agon, or the intellectual contest. This was the part of the Greek party that would seem most alien to us today, a serious, often competitive debate on a chosen topic. One night, the topic might be, what is the nature of love, as famously depicted in Plato's writings? Another night, it might be, is it better to be feared or loved as a general? Or does the soul survive the death of the body? Each guest was expected to contribute a speech or a poem showing off their education, their wit, and their rhetorical skill. To be a good guest meant being able to maintain your logic and your flow of speech even as the wine began to take its toll. If you spoke too much, you were considered a bore. If you spoke too little, you were seen as a fool. The goal was sophrosine, a sense of moderation and self-control that defined the ideal Greek citizen. But the symposium was not just a philosophy lecture, it was also a place of games and physical skill. The most popular game was kotabos, which involved flicking the dregs of your wine at a target, usually a small bronze disc or a floating bowl in a larger tub of water. The winner would be granted a prize, which could be a piece of fruit, a sweet cake, or even a kiss from one of the entertainers. It was a messy, loud, and surprisingly competitive game that often resulted in wine-stained walls and a room full of laughter. As the night deepened and the crater was refilled, the intellectual masks began to slip and the komos, or the wilder side of the party, began to stir. Part 3. The Entertainers and the Hetairai. As the second crater was mixed and the topics of philosophy grew more heated, the doors of the andron would open to the performers. A Greek party was a full sensory experience, and music was the heartbeat that kept the rhythm of the night. Young boys and girls playing the olos, a double-piped reed instrument, would fill the room with a sharp, haunting melody. The sound of the olos was believed to be more emotional and provocative than the orderly strings of the lyre. It was the music of the passions, designed to loosen the limbs and the tongues of the reclining guests. Along with the musicians came the dancers, acrobats, and mimes, who performed scenes from popular myths or parodies of political figures. However, the most significant female presence at these gatherings was that of the hetairai. These were not common street workers, but highly educated, sophisticated companions who occupied a unique position in Greek society. Unlike the wives of the citizens, who were expected to remain in the secluded domestic quarters, the hetairai were trained in the arts. They could debate philosophy, quote poetry from memory, and hold their own in the sharp-witted wordplay of the symposium. They were the only women allowed to participate in these nights of intellectual and carnal pleasure. A famous hetaira like Aspasia or Phryne could command the attention of the most powerful men in Athens. Their presence added a layer of sexual tension and refined charm that transformed the drinking session into a high-stakes social arena. They were paid handsomely for their company, but they also held a degree of independence that was denied to the virtuous women of the city. In the flickering lamplight, as the wine flowed, the hetairai would move between the couches, pouring drinks and whispering secrets. They were the navigators of the evening's emotions, knowing exactly when to stimulate a debate and when to soothe a rising temper. To a guest, a night with a talented hetaira was a status symbol, a sign that he was a man of both wealth and taste. But even as the music grew louder and the laughter more raucous, the Greeks never forgot the presence of the god Dionysus. The pleasure was a gift, but it was also a test of one's ability to remain human while touching the divine madness. Part 4. The Shadow Side, Dionysian Madness. While the symposium was the peak of urban refinement, there was another type of party that took place in the shadows of the mountains. This was the realm of the Maenads, the women who left their looms and their homes to follow Dionysus into the wilderness. These gatherings were the polar opposite of the controlled, male-dominated symposium. In the forests of Mount Parnassus or Cithaeron, the rules of civilization were completely discarded. Under the light of the full moon, women would dance to the frantic beat of the tympanon until they reached a state of religious ecstasy. They believed they were possessed by the god, gaining superhuman strength and the ability to commune with the wild. Ancient texts whisper of sparagmos, the ritual tearing apart of live animals with bare hands, and omophagia, the eating of raw flesh. This was a party of the soul, a violent release from the crushing expectations of the patriarchal Greek city-state. Even the men who participated in these Bacchic mysteries often found themselves terrified by the intensity of the experience. It was a reminder that Greek culture was built on a thin crust of logic over a boiling sea of primal instinct. Back in the city, even the symposium could descend into this type of chaos if the symposiarch lost control of the crater. When the wine was mixed too strong, or the guests drank too fast, the sophrosyne or moderation was shattered. Arguments over politics would turn into physical brawls, precious pottery would be smashed against the stone floor. The evening would shift from a celebration of wisdom to a display of hubris, the overweening pride that the gods loved to punish. A man might wake up the next morning not with the memory of a brilliant speech, but with the shame of having offended his host. The Greeks lived in constant fear of this tipping point, yet they were drawn to it like moths to a flame. They knew that to truly know yourself, you had to see what happened when the mask of the citizen was removed. The party was a mirror, reflecting both the glory and the filth of the human condition. Part 5. The Komos, the Final Parade. As the oil in the lamps began to burn low and the first grey light of dawn appeared, the party entered its final, loudest phase. This was the Komos, a ritualized drunken procession through the streets of the city. The guests, still wearing their flower garlands and smelling of wine and perfume, would burst out of the house. Accompanied by the Olos players, they would dance and sing through the narrow alleys of Athens or Thebes. They would stop at the doors of friends to demand more wine or challenge passers-by to impromptu wrestling matches. It was a public demonstration of their social status and their temporary freedom from the law. The Komasts were like a colorful, chaotic serpent winding through the sleeping city, waking the neighbors with their shouts, "Is less than Hasson. Zero hash is greater than." While it might look like a simple riot to us, it was actually a sacred act dedicated to the god of the vine. By taking the party from the private andron to the public street, they were bringing the blessing of Dionysus to the whole community. However, this was also the time when the most trouble occurred. Young aristocrats might vandalize sacred statues or get into fights with the city guards. The famous statesman Alcibiades was notoriously known for his wild Komos parades, which often ended in political scandals. Eventually, as the sun, Ra, or Helios, in the Greek tongue rose over the Aegean Sea, the energy would finally dissipate. The garlands would be discarded in the gutter, and the guests would stumble back to their own homes. The transition back to daily life was often brutal, as the clarity of the morning light revealed the excesses of the night. But for the Greeks, the hangover was a small price to pay for the moments of profound connection and insight they had found. They had debated the gods, they had laughed with the muses, and they had danced with the shadows. A Greek party was not an escape from life, but a plunge into the very deepest parts of it. I will continue. we are moving into the deeper, more competitive, and often stranger aspects of these gatherings, the specific games of skill and the psychological aftermath that followed such intense nights. This section will add another 8,000 to 9,000 characters, bringing us closer to the 21,000 mark. Part 6. The Games of the Night and the Kotobos is less than Hasson. Zero hash is greater than. As the intellectual debates reached a stalemate, the Greek elite turned their attention to games that tested both their sobriety and their dexterity. The most iconic of these was Kotobos, a game that transformed the dregs of a wine cup into a projectile of social standing. Imagine a man, his head crowned with a wreath of ivy, reclining on his side while holding a shallow drinking cup, the kylix, by one of its handles. The goal was to flick the remaining drops of wine across the room with a precise, snapping motion of the wrist. The target was often a plastinx, a small bronze disc balanced precariously on top of a tall stand. If struck correctly, the disc would fall and hit a larger bronze basin below with a resounding metallic clang. The sound of success was greeted with cheers, while a miss was met with good-natured mockery and a demand for another round of drinks. Another variation involved floating small ceramic bowls in a large vat of water, with the objective being to sink them by hitting them with the wine dregs. To the Greeks, Kotobos was not just a silly pastime, it was a way to display charis, or grace, under pressure. They believed that a man's skill in the game reflected his favor with the gods and his control over his own motor functions. Betting was rampant, with stakes ranging from simple sweets and fruits to expensive jewelry or even the services of the entertainers present. As the night wore on, the floor of the andron would become slick with spilled wine, and the air would grow heavy with the sweet, fermented scent of the grape. But the games also had a darker, more competitive edge, often serving as a proxy for political rivalries. A man might use his skill in Kotobos to humiliate a rival in front of the city's power players, turning a party game into a subtle weapon of social assassination. Every flick of the wrist was a statement of confidence, and every hit was a reinforcement of one's place in the hierarchy of the elite. Part 7. The Aftermath and the Philosophy of the Hangover. When the last notes of the aulos faded and the guests finally retreated to their chambers, the hangover began. But for the Greeks, the physical discomfort of the morning after was a subject of genuine philosophical inquiry. They called the heaviness of the head kripale, and they believed it was a physical manifestation of the god Dionysus leaving the body. The morning after was a time of anamnesis, or recollection, where the guests would try to piece together the insights they had gained during the night. Did the debate on the soul actually reach a conclusion, or was it lost in the third crater? The Greeks practiced various remedies for the kripale, ranging from wearing wreaths of celery which they believed absorbed the vapors of the wine, to eating fried cabbage or bitter almonds. But the true remedy was katastasis, the restoration of the body's natural balance. They saw the symposium as a temporary disruption of the humors, a necessary chaos that allowed for new ideas to grow. However, the morning light also brought the risk of aishros, the shame of having behaved like a beast. If a man had insulted his host, or physically assaulted a slave in his drunken stupor, the social consequences were severe. His reputation in the agora, the public marketplace, could be tarnished for months, affecting his business deals and political standing. Therefore, the Greeks treated the symposium as a school of character, where the ultimate goal was to remain a gentleman even in the midst of madness. They wrote entire treatises on the proper way to drink, advising men to know their limit, and to avoid the hubris that comes with excessive intoxication. To the Greek mind, the party was not a separate part of life, but a microcosm of the state itself. Just as a city needed laws to function, a drinking party needed a symposiarch to ensure that the joy did not turn into destruction. The hangover was a teacher, reminding them of the fragility of human logic and the necessity of moderation in all things. Part 8. The Rural Rites, the Rural Dionysia. While the city dwellers had their refined symposia, the countryside had the rural Dionysia. These were local village festivals that were far more earthy and agricultural in nature than the urban gatherings. The centerpiece of these parties was the phallophoria, a grand procession where massive wooden symbols of fertility were carried through the fields. The villagers would dress in goat skins and smear their faces with wine dregs, dancing and singing bawdy songs to ensure a good harvest. There were no philosophical debates here. Instead, there were contests of strength, such as askoliasmos. This involved trying to balance on one leg on top of a greased, inflated wineskin, a task that resulted in countless falls and raucous laughter from the crowd. The wine flowed from communal vats, and the entire village, men, women, and children participated in the celebration. It was a time for the breaking of social barriers, where slaves were often allowed to eat and drink alongside their masters for a single day. This rural party was a celebration of the raw power of nature and the cycles of the earth. It was a reminder that before the Greeks were philosophers and soldiers, they were farmers and vine dressers. The rural Dionysia provided a necessary release for the laborers, a chance to vent their frustrations and celebrate the simple joy of being alive. It was loud, it was crude, and it was deeply connected to the soil of the Mediterranean. By the end of the festival, the village would be exhausted, but the spirit of the community would be renewed for the planting season ahead. I will continue the journey. We are now at approximately 18,000 characters. This next segment will focus on the culinary excesses and the mysterious, forbidden side of Greek celebrations. We are aiming to add another 8,000 to 9,000 characters in this part, bringing us to around 27,000. Part 9. The Food of the Gods. While the symposium was focused on the wine, the deipnon, or the preliminary banquet, was a showcase of Mediterranean luxury. A Greek party was a testament to the reach of their trade routes, featuring ingredients from the corners of the known world. The tables would be laden with small ceramic bowls filled with epiterum, a relish of green and black olives marinated in oil, vinegar, and honey. There were salty cheeses from Sicily, dried figs from Caria, and delicate nuts from the mountains of Thrace. The Greeks were masters of gastronomia, and they took great pride in the presentation of their dishes. Fish was the most prized delicacy, often served whole on large platters, decorated with sprigs of parsley and slices of lemon. Large eels from Lake Copais were considered the ultimate luxury, often wrapped in beet leaves and slow-roasted over charcoal fires. For the meat courses, they preferred game birds like partridge and thrush, or tender suckling pigs basted in wine and spices. But unlike a Roman feast which focused on sheer volume, the Greek banquet was about the harmony of flavors. They believed that a meal should stimulate the palate without dulling the mind, preparing the body for the intellectual labor of the drinking phase. The bread was a central part of the meal, served in various shapes and textures, from crusty barley loaves to soft wheat rolls dusted with poppy seeds. Slaves would move quietly between the couches, offering basins of scented water for the guests to wash their hands between courses. There were no napkins. Instead, pieces of soft bread dough were used to wipe the fingers and then discarded on the floor for the household dogs. As the final platters of cakes and honey-soaked pastries were brought out, the atmosphere would shift. The solid food was a foundation, a necessary weight to prevent the wine from rising too quickly to the brain. The transition from the banquet to the drinking was marked by the paean, a hymn sung in unison to honor the gods. This collective song reinforced the bond between the guests, reminding them that they were part of a single, civilized community. Part 10. The Sacred Rituals of the Mysteries. Beyond the private homes and the village squares, there was a type of party that was guarded by the threat of death. These were the Eleusinian Mysteries, the secret rites that promised the initiated a better life in the underworld. Once a year, thousands of Greeks would march from Athens to Eleusis in a massive torchlit procession. But the party truly began when they entered the Telesterion, the great hall of initiation. What happened inside was a closely guarded secret, but ancient writers hint at a night of sensory overload and spiritual awakening. They would drink the kykeon, a mysterious beverage made from barley, water, and mint. Modern scholars believe the kykeon may have contained an ergot fungus, a natural hallucinogen that induced powerful visions. The initiates would spend the night in a state of altered consciousness, witnessing things said, things done, and things shown. There were no status symbols here. The rich and the poor, the free and the slave, all wore the same simple robes. It was a party of the soul, where the boundaries between the living and the dead were temporarily dissolved. They danced to the sound of drums and flutes, their movements guided by the flickering light of thousands of torches. The goal was to experience epopteia, the final revelation that removed the fear of death forever. When the sun rose over the sanctuary of Demeter, the initiates would return to their lives as different people. They had participated in the ultimate party, one that celebrated the eternal cycle of the grain and the soul. This spiritual celebration provided a balance to the intellectual rigor of the symposium and the physical chaos of the rural Dionysia. It was the hidden party that held the fabric of Greek society together, providing hope in a world of constant war and uncertainty. Part 11. The Architecture of the Party. The very structure of the Greek house was built around the needs of the party. The andron, the men's room, was usually the most decorated and well-ventilated space in the home. The floor was slightly sloped toward the center, allowing for the easy washing away of spilled wine and food debris. The couches were arranged in a U shape or a circle, ensuring that no guest was ever left out of the conversation. The walls were often painted with trompe-l'oeil scenes, making the room feel larger and more connected to the outdoors. In the summer, the doors would be left open to the peristyle, an inner courtyard with a central garden and a fountain. The sound of trickling water provided a soothing background to the heated debates on the nature of justice. Even the pottery used at the party was a form of communication and art. The kylix, or drinking cup, often featured eye motifs on the outside, so that when the guest tilted his head back to drink, he appeared to be wearing a mask. Inside the cup, hidden by the wine, were scenes of satyrs, dancers, or even warnings against the dangers of excess. As the guest drank, the image would slowly be revealed, serving as a silent commentary on the night's activities. This integration of art, architecture, and social life was unique to the Greek world. They did not see a party as a distraction from their environment, but as the highest use of that environment. Every element of the room was designed to facilitate koinonia, the sense of fellowship and shared experience. A Greek man's wealth was not measured by the size of his house, but by the quality of the parties he could host within it. "I've got the count," we are at roughly 24,000 to 26,000 characters. This final section will push us over the finish line to the 35,000 character mark by exploring the social scandals, the political dangers of these gatherings, and the final, haunting conclusion of our night by the fire. Part 12. The Dark Side of the Crater. While the symposium was a place of high culture, it was also a place where a man's life could be ruined in a single hour. The mixture of wine and politics was a volatile brew, and many of the most famous trials in Greek history began at the bottom of a cup. In the intimate setting of the andron, secrets were whispered that would have been kept silent in the public assembly. A man might boast of a hidden alliance or mock a powerful general, only to find his words repeated to his enemies the next morning. The Greeks had a word for this, oinos kai aletheia, or in wine there is truth. But truth was a dangerous thing in a city-state as competitive and paranoid as Athens. The most famous scandal occurred in 415 BC, when a group of young aristocrats, fueled by a night of heavy drinking, allegedly defaced the Hermae. These were sacred stone statues that stood at the street corners of the city, protecting the homes and the travelers. The act was seen as a terrifying omen and a direct assault on the religious foundations of the city. The investigation that followed led to the downfall of Alcibiades, the most brilliant and controversial man of his age. The party, which was supposed to be a sacred ritual, had become a scene of sacrilege and political sabotage. It serves as a reminder that the Greek party was never truly private in the way we understand it today. Everything you did, from the way you held your cup to the jokes you told about the gods, was a reflection of your loyalty to the state. A single slip of the tongue could lead to exile, confiscation of property, or even the hemlock cup of execution. Behind the masks of the satyrs and the laughter of the flute girls, there was always the cold eye of the informer. To party in ancient Greece was to dance on the edge of a razor, where the line between a guest and a criminal was as thin as a papyrus scroll. Part 13. The Legacy of the Greek Party. The Greek party died out with the rise of the Roman Empire, which preferred the massive, gluttonous convivium to the intellectual symposium. But the influence of those nights in the andron has never truly left us. Every time we gather around a table to debate an idea, every time we toast to a friend, we are repeating the gestures of the ancients. They taught us that drinking is not just a biological act, but a social and philosophical one. They showed us that the best ideas often come when the mind is relaxed and the heart is open. But they also left us a warning about the fragility of civilization. The Greeks knew that a society is only as strong as its ability to control its own passions. The crater was a symbol of the universe, a mixture of the divine wine and the earthly water. If you lived too much in the wine, you became a beast. If you lived too much in the water, you became a stone. The goal of a Greek life was to find that perfect ratio, that golden mean that allowed for both joy and justice. As we look back at their parties, we don't see a group of people escaping from reality. We see a people who were trying to confront the most difficult questions of existence while holding a cup in their hand. They didn't want to forget the world. They wanted to understand it, one verse and one drink at a time. Their parties were the laboratories of the human spirit, places where the boundaries of what it meant to be man were tested and redefined. Part 14. The Final Descent. The Closing. The fire has now burned low, and the wood has turned to white ash in the center of our circle. The stars above us are the same stars that looked down upon the Komos parades of Athens and the moonlit dances of the Maenads. We have traveled through the refined halls of the elite and the wild, brambled paths of the mountain forests. We have seen how a single culture could host both the most orderly debates and the most chaotic riots. The Greeks understood that the human soul is a vast and complicated thing, needing both the light of logic and the darkness of the dance. Tonight, as you leave the warmth of this campfire and return to your own life, carry a piece of that ancient balance with you. Remember that life is both a banquet and a mystery, and it is up to us to find the harmony between the two. The history of a people is not just written in their wars or their laws, but in the way they celebrated the fact that they were alive. Thank you for joining me for this journey into the flickering nights of the past here at Campfire Night Stories. If these stories of ancient revelry have piqued your curiosity, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our gathering. Your support is the libation that keeps our channel growing and our stories flowing. Sleep well, and may your dreams be as vivid as a Dionysian vision and as clear as a Socratic dialogue. The embers are fading. The story is told. The night is yours.